welcome everybody to this special The Way Forward webinar series, International Logistics in a Time of Turmoil. My name is Ming Fan. I am the Executive Director of the U.S. Heartland China Association, a 501c3 nonprofit committed to building bridges between U.S. and China. As you can see, our motto is, not all bridges are built of concrete and steel. Equally important bridges are built on friendship, cultural communion, and commercial cooperation. Where these bridges exist, communities flourish. This program is made possible through generous donation by Ford Foundation and Henry Luce Foundation, the support of our organization. But we welcome you, if you're not a member or donor, to make a donation at usheartlandchinaassociation.org. This event is also made possible through the collaboration between 4 organizations: U.S. Heartland China Association, Shandong University of Finance and Economics, Global Supply Chain Classroom, and Sino-America Logistics Coalition. And we are so honored to have a Chinese partner and a Chinese speaker for the program today. But next, I'd like to welcome Professor Liu Weilong, Dean of School of Management Science and Engineering from Shandong University of Finance and Economics, to give his remarks. Professor Liu.
Okay, thank you. And dear friends from academia and logistics industry, as one of the partners of this event, I'd like to extend our warmest welcome and sincere gratitude to all of you present, and to all of leaders, experts, friends of our works who have supported our university development for many years. Shandong University of Finance and Economics is located in the national famous historic and cultural city of Jinan, known as the City of Springs. Shandong University of Finance and Economics possesses the long history, large scale of learning, and prepared school of characteristics, giving the priorities to the economic and management disciplines. The university has 23 teaching institutes with more than 13,000 full-time undergraduate and postgraduate, and is ranked among the top 10 University of Finance and Economics in China. At present, the school has the 5 graduate majors, include information management and information system, e-commerce, logistic management, engineer management, and big data management and applications. It has also the 2 master degree programs of management science and engineering and management, as well as doctoral program of management science and engineering. We were one of first university in China to offer the logistic management major. At present, it is national first-class majors with the master degree of logistic management and engineering. Under the directions of the e-commerce and the supply chain management, it has taken the face in the social leaders, taking the training of innovative practicabilities as the focus, highlighting the intelligent logistics and strengthens the integration of the new generation of information technology with logistic and supply chain management. At present, change in the world, times and histories are unfolding in a different way. In the face of the world unprecedented change in the 100 years, we should contribute stability and constructive strength to the world full of the uncertainties and complex factors. In a time of turmoil, logistics act as a bridge to the connect the world, solving the imbalance between the demand and the supply of the food, energy resources, manufactured goods. Ladies cultivate opportunities in the crisis and open up new situations in the changing time. Shandong University of Finance and Economics is the eager to work with the Global Supply Chain Classroom, the Sino-American Logistics Council, and other organizations and representatives to promote international industry and education exchange. Logistics fixed link global economic and trade. Education connect our soul and future in the world. I wish this webinar success in attaining its goals. I would like to wish every good health and every success. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your remarks. And it's actually really inspiring to hear you. As someone outside the logistics industry, I appreciate going to the store or shopping. Yep. The physical supply chain is still connecting our world. Even on the surface, it looks like we're broken or falling apart in some way. So thank you so much. And with that, little housekeeping, we receive a lot of questions from the registrants, but we also welcome those of you attending to submit question in the Q&A box. And with that, I'm gonna now turn to our moderator, Dr. Haozhe Chen, and from Iowa State University. And before he will moderate the excellent panel we have, you are in for a treat. So Professor Chen Haozhe is a professor of supply chain management in the Debbie and Jerry Ivy College of Business at Iowa State University. He has published many articles, he authored books, but he's also very involved with various international industry organizations. He's a member of the Council of Supply Chain Management Professionals, and he also, of many other roles he took, he served on the voting panel for the Gartner Top 25 Supply Chain Ranking for 9 years. And he's also very actively engaged with the Sino-American Logistics Council, and who's leader, and you'll hear from on the panel very soon. So with that, Dr. Chen, I'm gonna turn the event back to you and to lead us through this incredible, timely topic and much anticipated.
Thank you very much, Ming, for your introduction. It is my great pleasure to work with our fantastic panel today for a discussion about international logistics. As Ming said, it's been a wild several years for everyone who works in the logistics and supply chain field. So as a supply chain logistic professor, it's both difficult and challenging, exciting time. So when I say exciting is that in the last several years, the terms logistics and supply chain management really appear in everyday media coverage, conversation. Even when I wear Iowa State University Department of Supply Chain logo shirt in the supermarket and in grocery stores, more than once, people will walk toward me saying, "Have you fixed all the supply chain issues?" So it is a really exciting time to teach, to study logistics and supply chain. And then our students also feel it's unreal, they can see everything happening, in front of your eyes. But on the other hand, it is very difficult for us to teach, those different concepts. The reason is I have to keep asking myself, do these concepts, do these ideas still apply today? Because we're facing so many uncertainties we've never seen before. So that's why hopefully today with our conversation with the fantastic panel, we'll get a better idea about what's happening in international logistics, what are the things companies can think to do, actions to take to how to cope these different uncertainties. So again, as I said, we have 5 outstanding panelists. They all have very diverse background with extensive experiences and knowledge, about different aspects of international logistics. So Helen Akuzino is a managing director from Deloitte, one of the largest professional service company in the world. And then we have Greg Tuthill, it's Chief Commercial Officer from CQ. That's one of the leading container leasing company in the world. And then also we have Chang Tan, who is the Executive Director of Sino-American Logistics Council. We have Kurt Jaden, who is longtime executive with HNI, which is one of the largest office manufacturer companies in the world. In fact, I'm very proud HNI is headquartered in Iowa, in the U.S. And then also we have Pontiac Lee, who has extensive experiences, in industry, particularly logistics industry. He worked with American companies in China. Now he runs his own company. So just to get this started, I will go to our first, give my first question to Helen. You're with Deloitte. Deloitte, as I said, Deloitte is one of the largest professional service companies in the world. And then you're dealing with clients worldwide. So, and then also you specialize in trade. Trade is closely related to international logistics. So maybe you can give us a 30,000 feet overview how the trade has been developing in the last several years. What are the major trends? So.
Sure. Thank you. And thank you for having me. Yeah, my area of practice and experience has been focused on a portion of the supply chain. All these issues are interrelated, less so on the transportation and logistics aspects, but more so on the import and export compliance aspects of the supply chain. So when goods leave one country and enter another country, those crossings into those jurisdictions is where my primary focus has been throughout my career. And in that space, the events of the last 4 to 5 years have certainly accelerated major changes to supply chains and sourcing. We have, back in 2018, a lot of increase in tariffs came out of many countries on goods like steel and aluminum. We're all aware of the tariffs that China and the US have put on many of each other's goods coming into those countries. We had supply chain shortages due to the pandemic, the labor shortages that were a result of that, the logistics challenges as well that became a result of that basically hindered the flow of goods from what we were accustomed to previously. So some of the trends we've seen that started, as I said, 4 or 5 years ago, pre-pandemic, were shifts towards multi-country sourcing. That's what excessive tariffs do, is they get companies planning around the tariffs. How do we make our product without attracting these tariffs? Do we move production to other countries? Do we move some production to other countries? There's a whole lot of decisions that go into that to try to manage the financial impact of what was happening back then. We've also seen as a trend the accelerated, especially because of the pandemic, an acceleration of technology solutions. Trade data isn't always as visible as other data in an organization because it's very transactional, and parties such as customs brokers and freight forwarders have a lot of the information, and the customs and trade tax authorities and jurisdictions have that information, but a lot of organizations struggle with having a centralized source of that information within their ERP systems. So what we've seen is there was already, global trade management was already well underway, but we have seen an acceleration in the use of technology and data analytics around trade. Another area that has impacted supply chain is the increased focus on environmental, social, and governance and sustainability issues. Increased enforcement of forced labor bans. We're all aware of the US last year implemented some legislation around issues of forced labor that are creating some very real challenges for US importers in the US. There are carbon taxes that have come up. There are alternative energy incentives that have come up, to focus in on climate change. There are, in the US, they've connected the supply chain security preference program to compliance with new forced labor requirements. So it's all interwoven, and these issues are coming to the forefront as well. In the US in particular, the Inflation Reduction Act just got passed. There's a portion of that that requires a minimum US content to get certain tax credits. So there's also a shift towards production back, particularly in the US. The CHIPS Act was recently passed, encouraging the production of silicon chips in the United States and bringing that back to the US. It can't go without saying that another impact of supply chains has been the situation in Russia and Ukraine. A lot of companies had to very quickly, when sanctions came up, very quickly restructure their supply chains for anything involving goods coming to and from, or involving parties from in Russia and Belarus as well. So there's been this greater increase in a focus on all these crises, if you will, occurring at the same time, and the need for crisis management. And then just underpinning all of that, there's been a global talent war for skilled global trade professionals. So we like to say in the global trade space that it's a good time to be a global trade professional because we're finally in very, very high demand. So those are just some of the things we're seeing as a result of just the events of the last 4 or 5 years.
Thank you, Helen. That's wonderful, because what you highlighted, the trends and then also the influencing factors, they're all intertwined. So it's, I just want to add to one thing is Land O'Lake is a big American food company, and then they're one of our supply chain forum members. So their supply chain executive was sharing with us how the war in Ukraine is impacting their business, although because Ukraine is the largest sunflower oil exporter in the world. So Land O'Lake does not import from Ukraine. So they import olive oil from Turkey, but because the sunflower oil export was cut off because of the war, and then Turkey banned all oil export, so which actually indirectly impact Land O'Lake's operation. So it's just one quick example how all the events are connecting to each other.
Yeah.
So let's I'll get to our next panelist, and then with the question about the overview of the container shipping, international shipping industry, because Greg is the Chief Commercial Officer of CQ. And then you have a great insights, about the industry, where what are the factors influencing the international shipping. And I listened to your presentation before; it was wonderful. So maybe you can give us some insight.
Sure. First, thank you for having me. I'm looking forward to the discussion, and I appreciate the opportunity to participate in the panel. I've been in shipping for over 30 years, and until about 2 years ago, I don't think too many people paid attention to container shipping. Similar to you, Dr. Chen, I was asked a lot of questions shortly after the pandemic about the supply chain. So maybe today I can just start with a few observations, insights, and start with an overview. So if you're okay, I'll go through just a few slides to give you some texture around where we were, where we are today, and maybe where we're headed in terms of the container shipping environment, because there's been a lot of change just in the last 2 to 3 years. So let me start. I'll share my screen, and I will try to, in the interest of time, I'll try to just focus on the highlights. But before we start, can everyone see my screen?
Yes.
Okay. So what I thought I would do is just spend a few minutes, again, talking about where we are, what were some of the catalysts in terms of what created some of the implications and some of the impediments in terms of cargo flow, and then where we're headed in terms of maybe future preparation for importers, exporters, but also how the supply chain might change and rotate based on some of the things that we've experienced. So just a little bit about CQ. We've been around since 1993. We're a container leasing company, one of the largest container leasing companies in the world. We focus primarily on the refrigerated market. So most of our investments in containers are focused on the refrigeration end of the space. We have been really a thought leader in refrigerated transport, and that's what we'll continue to do. That doesn't mean we do not do other asset class leasing contracts, but our focus is really on the refrigerated markets. So if you look at what's happened recently, I mean, we've had a lot of different events that have occurred that have created some real significant change in cargo flow. And I think that we've already touched on some of it. I think Helen already mentioned that, between the pre-pandemic issues related to tariffs and then heading into the pandemic where we had almost a shutdown in global trade. And then following that, we had a rapid expansion in terms of cargo volume with surges taking place where the volume exceeded capacity in most cases. So that created a lot of congestion. On top of that, we had then, of course, events that took place, including COVID policy issues, which also created some impediments in terms of cargo flow. But then on top of that, we had the Russia-Ukraine war, which also created some disruption in the networks. So all of this is outlined here. I'm not going to go through all of these items, but all of these listed items have really created a significant change in how cargo flowed through networks globally. Some of the recent events and activities, inflationary pressure, demand shocks, mostly on the energy side, regulatory oversight, COVID policy restrictions, some of the changes in networks related to the Russia-Ukraine situation have all created on the right-hand side these market impacts in terms of the cargo flow relative to container shipping. So not new. I think it's pretty obvious that these things are very apparent. Things are now starting to ease and things are starting to normalize, but there's some implications in terms of where we're headed given some of the things that we have to deal with going forward. So China is certainly a big component of global trade. There's been a lot of volume that has certainly been coming out of China, and also there's a big trade dependency on China. And I'm not here to talk about the COVID policy practices within China, but what I would like to say is I think some of the COVID policy practices have created some disruption in network flow, mostly in and out of China. So, and that continues, and we'll see if that starts to normalize soon. But a few months ago, we had South China, Yantian, we've had Ningbo, we've had Shanghai, all been impacted by shutdowns, lockdowns, and then that has certainly created some implications with cargo flow, port rotations, and generally speaking, just congestion issues as a result. So we have to plan around that going forward because we don't know if that's going to end anytime soon, but it's certainly a contingency we have to prepare for. Just highlighting the Russia-Ukraine situation, that came very quickly without a lot of preparation. That also created disruption and rotation in terms of networks, also dependency on some of the supply and the outsourcing that took place. So that again was mentioned already, but certainly had a big impact on a pivot and a rotation in the networks related to cargo and container shipping. If you think about what happened just in the last 2 years as a result of some of the congestion, two things really occurred. One is there was capacity reductions as a result of congestion. So I think many of you have probably read about, even though we had adequate supply, not only on the equipment side, container supply, and also vessel supply, the capacity reductions were a result of velocity slowing down. So rotations were not moving in a 35-day rotation. They were exceeding 40 and 45 days because a lot of the vessels were either delayed or in idle status based on not being able to be serviced at the terminals. And that's not only for the US, but that was also occurring in the European theater. So if you think about what happened and what the result was, we had upwards of 15 to 17% reductions in capacity that further exacerbated the ability to get cargo moving to the right destination and fulfill demand needs, shortly after the pandemic when there was a surge in cargo volume. Moving on, these are just some highlights. I'm not going to go through this. We had unprecedented financial performance in the container industry in the last 2 years, but also in terms of volume surges. So these are just highlights. I've been in the business for 30 years. I've never seen anything like what we experienced in the last 2 years. Of course, some of this created some of the inflationary pressures on landed cost economics for some of the importers and some of the consumers. So there's some knock-on effect from some of these points. And of course, I'm going through this very quickly, but between the freight rate growth in just the last 2 years, on top of the congestion, both of those components have really made a big change in how we might have to plan going forward. Of course, the freight rates have since rapidly declined. I'll talk about that in a minute. If you look at the utilization and demand, you'll see where we are. We hit that peak back in April and May in terms of growth, in terms of volume surges. And then when we start to look at the right-hand side, you'll see on a freight rate basis, we have seen a rapid decline just in the last 4 months, probably the fastest decline ever in history in container shipping. So on one side, the good news is that we are now seeing some relief on container freight rates, which will certainly help on making sure that the consumption demand might get a little bit of relief from higher prices. On the other side, it starts to go ahead and go from a highly profitable environment to a loss-giving environment, which we have to just kind of keep our eyes on to make sure that we don't see any disruption with bankruptcies or a fallout from the shipping sector. Just real quickly, despite the slowdown in the last few months, the container market will continue to see positive growth, albeit much less than what we experienced in 2021. But we're going to see some normalization as we go forward with growth rates that are a little bit tied back to normalization. Interest rates have certainly been front page news items as of late. The impact there is operating expense and also operating performance might change on the container liner shipping sector. Just looking quickly at the cold chain market side of the business, I think that it's not new that supply chains and food movement on the refrigerated sector has been certainly impacted by not only congestion, but there's also been a lot in the news about food supply outsourcing being something that's got to be focused on going forward because of supply shortages, and then the outsourcing starting to proliferate and be more pervasive outside of local regional sourcing. That ties into food waste mitigation. There's been a big tie from technology into food waste mitigation. It's a big focus area for most countries right now. And that also then leads me into item number 3, which is technology will help in 2 areas. One, decarbonization goals and targets that are certainly on the agenda for most operators and for most of the corporations today. Which also will help food waste mitigation. And again, all of this is tied back into number 4, which is technology, which is starting to advance and address these items. So those are the interdependencies. I'm not going to go through this slide in a lot of detail, but there's a big shift and rotation about where we are starting to source perishable food products. So that is starting to really change. And what's happening is because of climate change and also because of some of the geopolitical issues, we're starting to see some shift in where food is being sourced. Certainly, there's been longer transits associated with perishable food sourcing, and that leads back into technology advancements, which are helping allow for longer transit food transportation. I'm not going to go through these items. I'll just mention that efficient perishable food transportation and refrigerated transportation technology will be a big component and focus area to making sure that we are supplying perishable foods to the right countries, to the right locations, to the consumption markets. And that may include some new sourcing alternatives as we go forward. just real quickly, in the interest of time, I'm not going to spend too much time on this particular slide, but the most resilient trade sector in container shipping is the reefer trade. That'll continue to be the case just because irrespective of the economic downturn that we are experiencing now and probably will continue to experience in 2023, food sourcing will certainly be a priority and will continue to be much more resilient than the consumption or the consumable markets. The reefer trades have been quite erratic only because food sourcing has changed, and this is just a illustration of imports versus exports, mostly tied to the U.S. markets, and the exports and the import imbalance has starting to expand. Container reefer plug capacity is increasing, again, tied back to my earlier comment where outsourcing is taking place from faraway places and starting to proliferate to new sourcing locations. That's all I have on the overview. But I guess, one maybe final comment, and again, I don't want to take too much more time. We've really witnessed and observed three phases or three cycles in terms of container shipping and import-export trades. One was the pre-pandemic, which was more of a normalized trade until we started to see what the impact was on tariffs. Then we had the pandemic cycle, which was first characterized by a sharp decline and shutdown from the sourcing locations, which impacted volumes to the extent that there was sharp declines in terminal volumes. Then we had the pandemic cycle that was followed by stimulus, and that created tremendous stimulation in consumption demand, which created these surges that were unnatural, uneven, and created capacity constraints, and then as a result, created the congestion. That's where all of our neighbors, friends, and colleagues asked about why we can't get product to final destinations. And now there's the post-pandemic where we're experiencing very, very sharp and significant declines in volume rates. And we're going to probably witness and observe a very significant oversupply situation, which will be the next battleground for trying to address congestion, depot congestion, and then an oversupply of just not only assets, but vessel capacity. So we have a few challenges ahead, but I think for the most part, it's nothing that's insurmountable. I think we can all work towards seeing a much more normalized supply chain network as we enter 2023 and 2024. That's all I have, Dr. Chen. If there's questions, we can do those now or later.
Let's do it later, but thank you very much, Greg, for like a wonderful presentation. That's great information, great insights. And then actually from your talk with Helen's talk, I saw some common themes. Both of you mentioned technologies, advances, and then also both of you mentioned sustainability or sourcing strategy. I believe later panelists will also pitch in on that. And then let's keep moving, and then we'll come back with some discussion. So next one, I'll go to Chang, and then who is the exec director for Sino-American Logistics Council. Chang, I don't want to make you look very old, but you have dedicated yourself to the exchange between China and U.S. for several decades. And then I think you have like a great knowledge about the logistics linkages between China and the U.S. I know our topic is about international logistics, but no one can deny China and U.S. are major trading partners, and then even with the trade tensions between the two countries, I personally think these two countries will continue to be major trade partners. And then that's why the international logistics between these two countries, will continue to be very important. So maybe you can share with us some of your insights about the logistic linkages between the two countries.
Sure. First of all, I want to congratulate Min Fan and her group at USHCA for putting this event on, and this somewhat difficult time to have U.S.-China dialogue is very, very important. And on behalf of Sino-American Logistics Council and the Global Supply Chain class. And we look forward to working with her to bring mutual benefit to the people of both countries. The previous speakers have done a great job of putting all this in context and some of the disruptions that we've seen over the last couple of years. I won't go into details about them, but I just want to start off with this one slide. That basically what we want to show is that with all the discussion about disruptions, what we're seeing that is the cargo flow is continue to increase, right? Regardless of whether there's trade frictions with other countries and so on, that it is still increasing and is continued. We expect it to continue to increase going forward. So that's a good thing. And we also know that supply chain disruptions now became headline news. Those of us been in this industry for a long time, that really nobody talked about supply chain years ago, and all of a sudden everybody's talking about supply chain, and every problem was considered a supply chain issue, which I guess now people understand what the supply chain management do. And my talk will specifically talk about U.S. China, but this disruption was worldwide. It wasn't focused just on U.S. China trade, and primarily a lot of people recognize the disruption caused by COVID. But my research and looking into this whole industry, looking back, a large number of years, is that the conclusion is that the COVID is not the cause of the disruptions. The COVID exposed some of the weaknesses within the system. Well, the whole container shipping system, the international supply chain system that we've put in place over the last number of years, it's become so lean, so efficient, that when COVID hit, it really exposed all the weaknesses of that system. So like Professor Chen said, now we kind of have to rethink, all the things that we've been teaching all these years, are they still applicable? Is this still a way going forward? And what does the new normal look like? We thought, what does it look like going forward? So we'll discuss some of these things going forward, and kind of just as a discussion. Nobody knows what's really going to happen in the future, but I like to take this as a discussion of what we think is going to happen. One of the issues that Gregory even brought up is with the container lines. Over the last couple of years, it's gone from boom, now looking at with record profits, and now looking at the rates dropping significantly. Well, what did they do? The question: what did they do prior to this, the pandemic, the pre-pandemic phase, and what's been happening since with their record profits? What are they doing with all that money? One of the things that they're doing is vertical integration, and specifically some of the larger companies, things like Maersk, China Costco Group. They're transforming themselves from a container shipping line to a door-to-door fully integrated logistics company, and that's what they want to do. They made a large number of acquisitions in this area, and in this slide to show some of the ones that that's been done, whether it's the terminal operations, third-party logistics companies. Most of them have gotten into air cargo as well. They've acquired aircraft. They've acquired e-commerce fulfillment companies. So looking forward to the future, their ambitions are to offer end-to-end logistics service, which from one perspective offers more efficiency, better traceability, and perhaps better service for their customers. But on the other end, because they have such control or such market power over the very critical ocean transport link, that they can use that market power to control a lot of the rates or limit choices for shippers. So that's one of the concerns going forward, is about competition in the global supply chain. So that's one of the things that we're looking into, and also a lot of governments or regulators are looking into this. Some of you may know about the USFMC. They put out their investigations with the DOJ, whether there's anti-competitive activities within this industry. They had the Ocean Shipping Reform Act 2022, which really didn't have a real impact on the industry, but it was something that I think the Biden government did to show that they're taking action to help the consumers or the businesses with the supply chain crisis. But we do have the European Commission, the block exemption review coming up, and they are looking at this as well. And there are various groups. Of course, arguments on both sides saying, well, whether there is competition and how we should look at the industry competition, whether they use the traditional way of looking at just the ocean shipping portion, or should they be looking at the whole end-to-end supply chain? Because this has become a matter of national security for a lot of companies that they're really looking at this as what can we do to secure our nation's economy if a large part of our national economy is dependent on these large companies, which a lot of them have affiliations with their national governments to move the freight that our economy is dependent on. So this is a lot of discussion that is going on at the moment, and we'll see how that pans out. The other thing that's happening is a couple of things within the United States. Is there is possible strike in the West Coast ports. There is a possible railway strike going on with in the U.S. railways as well. And what a lot of shippers have done is because of the issues they have with the congestion in the West Coast ports, is shifted the ships to the East Coast ports. And that's what you're seeing on the chart on the right, is that I think last month the New York port, New Jersey port is becoming now the largest port, surpassing LA Long Beach. But the result of what's happening is that it's increased costs. It costs more to ship to the East Coast than the West Coast because we have to go around, and a longer trip, it takes longer, but it is more reliable for now. But we are seeing more congestion on the East Coast. And the traditional supply chain that we've been using for many years has been using the West Coast ports and then shipping the products to the East Coast markets by rail. If the East Coast is going to become the dominant ports that going to be using, that would change how the supply chain works within the United States. The freight flows, how does that work? How do we deal with empty containers? There was a big issue with empty containers on the East Coast ports. So that's another issue that that we need to look at, whether now that the congestion is gone on the West Coast, will the ships go back to the West Coast, even though the strikes, still we don't know what's happening with that, and also the rail strike. So I think there are a lot of questions and to be resolved there, and we'll still have to wait for that to resolve itself. And I think this is what's most concerning for businesses at the moment. A business are holding more inventory than ever right now. If you look at a lot of businesses, because of the problems they had last year, a lot of companies want to build up additional buffer inventory in their system. And now, at the same time, we have the U.S. economy slowing, and the consumer is not buying as much. Businesses now have too much inventory. There's a shortage of warehouse space. As we know, inventory costs money, and that again adds to the whole supply chain costs. That they've spent a little more money shipping the inventory to their warehouses. Now they're spending money housing all the inventory in their warehouses, and then now they have to sell it on a discount. That will have big impact on their profitability. But going forward, what will they do? Will they go back to the cost reduction methods that we were using years ago, say to reduce inventory and go lean, or would they just this is the new normal where there's going to be higher costs and the price is going to be higher because we just simply have to carry more inventory in our system. So this is something the business is going to have to deal with, and as the previous speakers talked about, with so many things going on, the COVID situation in China is still fairly unstable. We have unpredictable lockdowns, so we don't know which ports may possibly be locked down, which factories may be closed at any particular time. We have rising interest rates. We're not sure what's going to happen there. There's a pending recession in the U.S. So, but at the same time, we have these geopolitical issues going on, but the businesses are interdependent within U.S. and China. People have talked about a decoupling or moving the sources to other countries. But what happened during the pandemic is they found that actually China is probably the most reliable source for their products within Southeast Asia. On some of the developing countries in Southeast Asia, we simply don't have the mature supply chains that can reliably produce the products that we need. We don't have the highly efficient supply chains or port infrastructures in place to handle a large amount of cargo. So, but that is also going to be changing. So what I see going forward is going to be a lot of volatility going on there. I don't think it's going to go back to where we were pre-pandemic, where things were fairly stable for a long time. Is that we're becoming more and more efficient, but it's very stable to going forward, where there's going to be a lot of volatility within the supply chain, one way or the other. So. And the impact of climate disruptions, and specifically for the Midwest agricultural producers. They're seeing what's happening in the Mississippi River recently, that with the low water levels, the borders again stuck, not able to ship. But at the same time, we're looking at what's happening in the Yangtze River as well. It's also extremely low, and their boats can't navigate these lower regions as well. And we had the same problems in Germany with the Rhine River. So the impact of climate disruptions is another issue that is going to be impacting our global supply chains, and specifically even in the agricultural side. So, you asked what can we do to help alleviate some of these issues, and my thinking is that it just needs to be more communication and dialogue and cooperation with all parties involved. This is not a China problem or a US problem. It is a global supply chain problem that we need to cooperate and find solutions to these. As you may be aware, I was involved with the Yangtze Mississippi dialogue, which started in 2010, and we ran that for a number of years, switching between China and the US, hosting them to talk about things like sustainability, economic development along the river. So this is something that I hope we can restart and facilitate some of these discussions. And the last thing I was going to talk about, Helen talked about the lack of talent, and one of the things that we're doing now is on education side. I think that's no better way for us to move forward than to preparing our next generation to how to deal with all this volatility and supply chain sustainability issues. And I just want to talk about a couple of things that we're doing. We just launched the first global supply chain sustainability student competition that we're going to invite students from all over the world to come up with solutions for some of the issues we're facing. We've developed education programs to teach about the specific supply chains within Asia Pacific and within North America and also in Europe, to get more dialogue, more understanding of what's happening. Like for example, we we taught the North American supply chain module to Chinese students in Beijing so that they get a better understanding of what's happening in North America. We also produced an Asia Pacific supply chain course, and then we delivered to students from around the world as well, so they understand what's happening within Asia Pacific. So having the understanding or the insight into what's really happening versus what's you see in the media sometimes really prepares students going forward to deal with these issues. So that's what I'm going to talk about today, but I look forward to questions and answers or any discussions going forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Chang. That was great, and thank you for your effort in increasing the logistics dialogue communication between China and U.S. and then try to help address the talent challenge. And then actually, now I want to turn to Kurt. Kurt is a longtime executive with Iowa-based company, and then I know you recently retired from your position, but hopefully you can talk to us about in your background, with your experience, how American companies are dealing with all these challenges, and then looking forward, what are the actions could be taken. So
yeah, sure, happy to do that, Haozhe. Thank you. It's interesting to the panelists that have spoken. You wish you could go back in time and have a do-over on this, because if we all knew what we knew today, we'd be in, potentially be in a different place. But I think the reality is there's no quick fix to this from a manufacturing perspective. And I'll talk the total supply chain. I think there are two key things here that the recent events have provided exposure. One is, it's as one of the panelists noted, it's clearly highlighted the fragility or the strength of the supply chain. And I think particular those companies that had strength through the entire supply chain, from original source of materials through sub-suppliers, your core suppliers, and your logistics partners, have weathered that well. If manufacturing companies that I'll use the term shop internationally, as opposed to develop strong partnerships with international suppliers, have really struggled with that. And those that have invested for a longer term to build those capabilities, I think, have weathered that better than others. But I think going forward, what it's exposed and where companies have shifted, and probably should have been there much earlier, is about risk mitigation and diversification. Companies that have sole sourced supply have been severely impacted, and this has highlighted it. And Chung talked about inventory, and companies have a lot of inventory in the US, and the issue is not only level, they likely have the wrong things at this point as demand has shifted. So it's a double whammy as you think about that. So what manufacturers, and I'll talk our experience is, and again, it's not a short fix because the supply chains do not exist in many of these developing markets, but you have to take a longer view and say, okay, it may be that China was your primary supply base. You're going to take Chinese companies that are investing in other parts of the region and follow them there and help them develop in the Vietnams, in the Indias, in the Malaysias. It's looking in those markets to help develop that same supply base. And I think onshoring and reshoring clearly is a solution for that. But again, not a short-term fix. The labor issues in the US are acute, they're significant, and I would argue, unless you're in a specific industry in most areas of the country, there's no immediate fix here. And it's not only the suppliers, it's their suppliers that have that same issue. So again, it comes back to diversification and a longer term view to say, what should your supply chain and logistics footprint look like, and ensuring you've got enough diversification there that you can manage when there are port issues, when there are labor issues, when there are supply issues, when there's an issue in the Ukraine, to the event or the extent it's possible, but really think about it differently. And given I think the other piece that the previous panelists talked about, volatility, length of the supply chain is also a key issue. The world's changing at a much more rapid pace than it did 10 years ago or 20 years ago. So if you have a 90-day supply chain or a 120-day supply chain, much more difficult for you to adapt to your demand, because by the time it's here, the risk is it the right things? And despite our best forecasting tools and some of the largest manufacturing companies, all we have to do again is look at their inventory levels and their predictions. And we sell to some of those, or did in the past. They made the same mistakes as other folks, despite having the best technology, data analytics, and others. Their ability to forecast the market was challenged. So again, I think two things: A, from a manufacturing perspective, ensuring strength of your supply chain throughout from end to end, and partnering with those critical folks and companies. And I think second, risk mitigation and diversification, and ensuring you're not sole sourcing, you're looking across multiple markets, you're looking at domestically, to give yourself the best opportunity to be able to effectively, efficiently, and quickly meet demand. So Haozhe, I'll pause there and help you out with time.
Yeah. Thank you, Kurt. That's outstanding insights, because I totally agree with you. You highlight that it's not an overnight fix. And then companies need to think about their supply chain strategy, supply chain design, and also take a long-term view. And also, I'm very happy you mentioned, on top of technology, the relationship is critical, for like a agile and responsive supply chain. That's great. And then and I'll go to our next panelist, Pandiak Lee, because of like a technical issue, and then he couldn't use his camera. But Pandiak has a lot of experience working with American companies in China. He's based in Shanghai. Now he runs his own company in Shanghai. So Pandiak, I want to ask you, from Chinese companies' perspective, if they're involved in international logistics or international supply chain, so what are the issues, what are the challenges they face, and then going forward, what are your thoughts about how Chinese companies can cope with these uncertainties?
Okay, thank you very much for this invitation to join this meeting. And really sorry that because I'm at home, I have some flow, data flow limitations, so I cannot share my camera. Otherwise, my voice will be, not flow. And that's a very, interesting question for almost every Chinese entrepreneur. And so far, frank speaking, just like most of our panelists expressed, the COVID-19, control policy from Chinese government is very strict, still strictly now. Definitely will very impact our, logistic works, like the delivery time should be higher, and also the warehouse inventory will be increased. Definitely the cost will increase. And to give you another example is that very interesting from my company is that we import actually some a little high tech, machinery products from Taiwan. And unfortunately, I was informed 1 month ago that we have a part with certain kind of service treatment, which is the kind of a spec, a TN15. One of the major material for this surface treatment really come from Ukraine. But due to the Russia, the war between Russia and Ukraine, we cannot get the supply from that country again. So we have to change to another one to the replacement, specification. But that will cost us more than 4 months to find out the proper way, and also doing certain kind of test, and also get approval from our governments, from our customers. So this is one a little bit interesting things happened on my company. Those also will impact our supply. But definitely, due to the current war and other political reasons, the energy price is increased. Our logistic also increased a lot. So for our high-tech things in terms of the current situation for the international business, specifically for the logistic things, the delivery time we are confronting more uncertainty, and also the cost will confronting very high uncertainty because the energy price and also the warehouse sometimes. Another real example is I'm in Shanghai, and I have 2 containers from Taiwan in May, but at that moment there are a lot of block containers in Shanghai ports. So I have to change the destination from Shanghai to Qingdao because we will spend about 40 days to clean the custom from Shanghai, custom, the Shanghai port. But if we replace the Shanghai port to change the Shanghai port to the Qingdao port, we will spend about only 10 days. And also that product is very urgent product from required by our customer. And very fortunately, we have the right, decision to change the port from Shanghai port to Qingdao port. So we catch up the delivery on time. Otherwise, we will got a certain kind of punishment from our customer due to the delay. So that means the uncertainty caused by the COVID-19 is one of the high-tech things for almost every entrepreneur in China, and also due to the war and other political reasons, the cost of the logistic things will also digest our profits, reduce our profit sharply. So that's the 2 things I believe every Chinese company are confronting. Okay, that's the
Thank you, Pandyak, for sharing your excuse me, experience with us. And I think so this topic, international logistics, is such a big topic. We can sit here talking, for days. But within the time frame, before we open up for question and answers, I do want to go back to the whole panel. So we have discussed the overall situation, all the challenges, the trends in international logistics. But if we want to give our audience or companies some more specific advice or suggestions, how they can cope with these uncertainties, what would that be? I know Kurt, and then you already mentioned that, and then Chan somehow also touched on that. But overall, what should companies do to cope with these challenges?
Okay, thank you for this continued question. What we do is so far actually we have from the tool perspective, we are doing certain kind of we call this the change or optimizations. First of all, we actually ranking our customers, and some of the key customers actually we will stay together either by the phone or by mail, whatever the things. We will talk with them, continue to really firm the, we call this a medium-term or long-term cooperation. That means some of the key customers, we will definitely to dealing with the uncertainty by increasing certain kind of inventory. In furthermore, we even want to, we call this to protect the, we call this the supplier-owned inventory. That means to run a warehouse close to our customer side, and also we as a supplier to set up certain kind of inventory there. But to reduce that risk, we have to get a deal and promise from the customer to see that their demand prediction should have some kind of policy, so as to guarantee they can digest our inventory no matter how long time, but eventually they will responsible for digesting all of that inventory owned by us and set up by us, so as to avoid that kind of global logistic uncertainty. But from our company, we definitely will increase some kind of burden for cash flow and also for certain kind of cost. But we cannot put this way for all of customers, but for 1 to 3 key customers. Well, after we have this kind of philosophy discussion, we can have a promise deal, long-term contract, and to limit it, both of us to responsible for that inventory. Okay, so as to keep 90% of our sales as in a certain way by current uncertain situation. This is one of the key things we code. We code is to set up certain supplier-owned inventory to our key customer side. This is one thing. The other things for the logistic things, we also will work with certain kind of, just like some panelists expressed before, some kind of we call it a full capable logistic supplier. They are not only for international this section of the transportation, but can do the end-to-end, deliver things. And also we will have a deal and try to give them the kind of prediction. That means promise prediction. We call it the 1 + 3 months, prediction circle. And with the certain kind of tolerance, we can adjust it so as to give them a stable, delivery demanding or delivery, contract to them, so as to make sure they have some kind of flexibility to using some proper way and with certain kind of cost level, so as to ensure they can give us a kind of, logistic capability to make sure we can do the things together. So that means we put the customer side and also we will drag on, drive in our logistic supplier side to make a more tighter, tied up relationship. Definitely will focusing on those key customer in terms of the key, logistic suppliers. And the third thing is that we will do changing our sales to increase the portion of our domestic sales. That means for the logistic perspective, we will work with several we call it the logistic company who have capable for certain kind of domestic network, to set up certain kind of, we call it the satellite, small warehouse to their side. For instance, to north side, south side, and west side and east side. So as to make sure in case there are some, limitation happened due to the COVID-19 control policy, we still have some kind of inventory on that area, so as to a satellite hub to can deliver a certain amount of products to our custom side. Make sure we can have some kind of buffer capability.
Thank you. Those were great points. I'm glad you touched on the relationship again. As Kurt mentioned, work with selected key customers, and also you mentioned keep more inventory to meet their needs, and then also Kurt talked about the sourcing from like a diversification from sourcing perspective, but also you mentioned decentralize of your inventory, putting them at different locations to avoid those disruptions. But I want to open this up for other panelists. Greg, Helen, do you have any insights or observations how companies like shippers or Helen, your clients, what are the best practices they address these uncertainties?
Well, from a global trade perspective, not so much from the transportation, but just from the movement of goods, we see our clients doing a number of things. We've kind of coined a word called crisis-tunity. All these crises happening at once have created opportunity. I think, Greg, you mentioned how suddenly being a logistics professional is as popular as being a global trade professional. Everyone's finally understanding what you do and how important you are to the supply chain. So what I find in some of my clients is they want to ride that wave of opportunity and do things like get strategic global trade management through increased use of technology, getting approvals for automated solutions to be implemented, using artificial intelligence to manage some trade processes. They're also looking at outsourcing some of their compliance activities because there still is a talent shortage and they need a way to deal with that. But a couple of the other key things that they're doing, they're scenario planning. You know, a lot of them are worried about the Russia-Ukraine situation foreshadowing an even greater situation with the China-Taiwan geopolitical situation. You know, we don't know what's going to happen there, but based on experiences with the Russia-Ukraine situation, much lesser trading partners for the United States, with China and Taiwan being much greater trade partners with the United States, they're scenario planning. We've just been through a lot of shifting and change with the global trade, and you know what's going to happen there, and they're doing the scenario planning now to see what you know what the potential outcomes can be and what their path will be should things escalate in that region. We also have back to bread and butter compliance. You know, the enforcement by customs authorities and trade authorities is as aggressive, if not more. There are more regulations and more compliance issues to manage. And the customs authorities are back to in-person audits in a lot of jurisdictions. So things are continuing to ramp up again in that sense, and they have to keep their eye on that ball. So they're putting resources towards that. And then finally, they're concerned and they're planning for, you know, the reputational risks that go with not being focused on key environmental, social, and governance issues. You can't get away from it, and you have to integrate those issues of the day into the supply chain. So a lot of scenario planning, as I said, taking advantage of crisis tunity, and not waiting to see what the outcome would be, but planning for it in different scenarios.
Thank you. Yeah, Kurt mentioned the risk mitigation strategies. You know, actually in our classrooms, we also teach our students the supply chain risk management is not only like after things happen, you try to react. It's also, as Helen said, you know, scenario planning. You plan ahead to see what if, you know, scenarios, what you should do. So that's a great point. And then Greg, do you have anything to add? You know, how companies can better like respond to the changes, because the fuel prices just keep fluctuating. I know the overall shipping rates are going down, but I was so surprised to see a few days ago natural gas price in West Texas, you know, went to negative price. So, you know, how do companies deal with situation like that?
Yeah, I think most of the points that have been raised are probably appropriate in terms of you know, what should be on everyone's agenda in terms of how to pre-plan for 2023, 2024. And I think the three areas are sourcing, delivery, and then speed to market. And there's trade-offs on all those, all three of those. I think Kurt and Helen already mentioned that, you know, having alternative sourcing plans and not be overly dependent on one particular supplier makes a lot of sense these days. I mean, and in the news, we've at least read a lot about this. You know, Apple and Foxconn, that was a big issue where there was over dependency on that one supplier. So that has forced, you know, some of these importers and manufacturers to really think about sourcing going forward. So that will be, I think, probably one of the key priorities. In terms of delivery network from an origin destination delivery point perspective, there's a lot of importers that are starting to really think about having alternative entry points. And what I mean by that is we have, you know, looming on the near horizon this ILWU labor negotiation that has not accelerated over the past few weeks here, which could be a concern. And so how do we make sure we're prepared for either a shutdown, strike, or even a slowdown? And alternative entry points make a lot of sense, whether that's over the East Coast, whether that's through Mexico, whether it's through Canada. There's ways that you can deliver the same product to the same destination. You just have to have contingency plans to do that. So I think that's the second piece. Speed to market is the third item that I mentioned, and that we have conditioned ourselves to expect delivery to happen either the next day or within 2 days or even the same day. And so the offset to that expectation and being competitive is how much inventory do you carry to make sure you're competitive versus how much risk do you take relative to carrying costs and having the wrong inventory at the wrong time, to Kurt's point earlier. So the just-in-time delivery model is starting to shift, change, and rotate. And I think people are starting to rethink that a little bit. I don't think we're going to get to back-to-back sourcing because I don't think that's practical, pragmatic, or realistic. But there could be ways to shorten or compress the cycle time. DC bypass was a term that was used many, many years ago. That may come back and be something that is looked at to go ahead and compress delivery times and availability without taking the risk of inventory. So I think those are just a few examples. There's some key retailers that have already started to really think about these areas. Nike is one of them, and they have really started to think about all three of these items that I mentioned. Alternative sourcing, delivery network, contingency plans, and then, of course, the speed to market piece. So those are just a few ideas. I think, one thing I failed to mention when we talk about delivery, I think the terminals and the ports get the brunt of people complaining about why we can't get goods through the ports. But there's the inland complexity that also is something to think about. The rail networks, the ramps, and the DC networks are all, I think, viable areas to look for contingencies as well. So we have to kind of think about the entire end-to-end contingency plans as we think about these things. So those are just a few ideas.
Yeah, no, that's great. Actually, what you said definitely makes sense. Particularly the last point you were saying, the end-to-end. I know where there was a port congestion. It's not only about the issues at the port. It's also like I know the Union Pacific had to stop their rail service between the West Coast port and Chicago. The reason is the yard at Chicago Railroad are totally full with container, right? So it's all connected. We really need to look at the end-to-end supply chain issues. And then Kurt and Chang, do you have anything to add? What companies need to do?
Okay, I'll just start, and I just want to kind of build on what some of the other speakers already talked about. The one I want to emphasize is about relationships. And what we saw as well as during, especially at the beginning of the COVID, when nobody really had a plan how to deal with this, the fallback was on relationships. I mean, that's what made things work. And we talked about factories in China, how were they able to get trucks when the trucks were all stopped, and how would they get the workers, how did they deal with the suppliers. And at the end of the day, they came down with relationships. The people you had the best relationships with are the ones you dealt with in a crisis situation. But now at the same time, we said, well, we also want to diversify, and I think that's a fine balance that we have to kind of look at, where, like what Pontiac's saying, he wants to, have relationships or still stronger relationships with just a few logistics suppliers, but at the same time, you want to diversify. You want to have more than one supplier. So I think that's a fine balance. Like you had a really good relationship with one supplier, and what if that supplier is for whatever reason unable to deliver? Then what? So I think this is something that we have to work on going forward, and develop this be a trusted network type of of system where you have contingencies, you have good relationships, and also thinking the long term. I think that's really especially for small, medium companies. I think for large companies, they can have all these contingency plans, they can do all these scenario planning. But for a lot of companies, small, medium companies, they really don't have the resources to do this. And I think that's part of some of the members, some of the viewers say, well, we're a small company, we don't have the ability to do all this. Well, how do we work with it? We only have like 2 suppliers for the stuff that we're buying from. What do we do? I think that's the real challenge, I think, going forward.
Yeah, thank you. Actually, I'm glad you touched on relationship again. I want to add a little bit more from my own research, because last year I did the research, international research with my colleagues in Italy. So we collected data in Italy, the US, China, and Brazil. So the relationship topic definitely comes up, because we were asking respondents, what are your COVID-19 disruption response strategies? So not only relationship, it's also about personal relationship, because when emergency happens, a lot of people will rely on their personal relationship. So personal relationship with their suppliers, with their customers, with government agencies, with financial institutions. So it all can help. So I'm glad the multiple panelists touched on the important relationship. So we're about running out of time. So maybe, Ming, we should open up to take a few questions before we finish up.
Yes, so we're about 9 minutes, then we will close the public segment of the program and go into the private discussions. One of the first questions we have is actually in the Q&A. We also have a bunch of questions that was submitted by email in other ways. But first question let me address is actually from our friends in North Dakota, who 75% of soybean goes to China. So our friends from North Dakota Trade said that we finally seem to have a solution with the Great Lakes, Port of Duluth. And I know that is the opposite direction than the majority of the customer base in Asia, but it provides access to the Suez Canal and will alleviate a small amount of logistic burden on the upper Midwest. We have now received a commitment from a shipping line to do regular container freight routes through Duluth. The big problem for us is that we need containers. If any one of you on the panel is aware of or know of inbound container in the Great Lakes region, please let me know. So any reaction to that?
I can just make a comment. There's a new trend that is going to start to help match container demand with over surplus areas. There's a lot of platforms where they have interchange programs whereby people have the ability to go ahead and allow people to use containers through an interchange program, and that would allow access to containers that otherwise wouldn't be available for either exporters or importers where the owner doesn't have demand. So that I think will continue to be a trend that we see going forward. In terms of that specific region, I think the cooperation between exporters and importers is an opportunity for all of us to go ahead and start to look at to see where we can match inbound with outbound, where we normally wouldn't have round trip economics for a single source importer or exporter. So just a few ideas. I have been involved in some discussions around those type of concepts.
Great, thank you. So the next question is from Diane Long, who's actually in Shanghai. And she was wondering if, Greg, you could talk about cold chain technology and what are some examples, but even more importantly, we know container itself is an innovation, right? We didn't have a container and we should transform the logistics with supply chain. What are the other innovations coming up that could really help us ride through the chaotic time coming ahead?
Okay, I'll try to just kind of keep it to the highlights. So I keep the discussion to a few minutes here. So I think there's a couple areas that are probably worth mentioning. One, in terms of technology on the refrigerated container transport sector, the first and probably the most prevalent is telematics technology, which is a device that gets applied to the container that can be used to monitor remotely the condition of the cargo, the temperature, airflow, humidity, location, and also allow a shipper or operator to make adjustments remotely through firmware. That's all tied to a electronic platform that would be accessible through the cloud and through a PC. So that's one. Tied to that, there's predictive analytics technology, which would allow operators, shippers, importers, exporters to really look at the ability of how that machine on the refrigeration side of the transport is operating and make adjustments to prevent failure. So that would be another piece. One more area that I think is important to note on technology is controlled atmosphere. And controlled atmosphere is a technology that allows perishables to either be preserved for longer transit, longer periods of time, or for fruits, vegetables, or anything else that would have a ripening type shelf life. It would slow down that ripening by changing the oxygen levels and CO2 levels and nitrogen levels. So those are just a few things that have really, really advanced just in the last few years that have allowed longer transits, alternative outsourcing, and the ability to go ahead and expand just the overall network.
Thank you. The next question we have is maybe Chang could take it first. They were talking about the capacity, people looking at East Coast as solution. We have friends from the Mississippi River. They love the fact you mentioned the Mississippi Yangtze dialogue. It would be wonderful to have that dialogue coming back, because I get a sense of a lot of challenges that they are universal, international, right? The solution has to be international. So the question is it possible for the Mississippi River to be a viable alternative versus the East Coast and just the West Coast, given the infrastructure investment coming into the United States? And do you see a day where the Mississippi River can be an important alternative?
Well, the answer is yes, but it's not easy. You know, the U.S. the Department of Transportation has been trying to push a program called America's Inland Highway or something. I forgot what the exact name it's called. It is, you know, they're providing funding to encourage more containers to be moved off the roads and railways and onto using the inland waterways. And it's a program that's been going on for many years. The challenge is for the shippers to accept that the waterways is going to be slower, okay? And a lot of times it's going to be less reliable. So what we're seeing now is with the water levels, rail is much more reliable and it's quicker. So the only competitive advantage is perhaps cost. And with the railway market is the railways can adjust cost to compete with the inland waterways. So there is economic part of it. But from a logistics perspective, yes, it definitely works. And if you look at the Yangtze River is a great example because it moves a huge amount of cargo from inland China to Shanghai port. And the government has spent a lot of effort to modernize the Yangtze River over the last number of years to improve the port infrastructure and navigation infrastructure. So all these things can make it happen, but it does require a lot of commitment, not just from the government, but also for industry to really use the inland waterways to transport things other than bulk cargo, grains and aggregates to transporting containers. So this is something that can be done. It's just people have got to decide that that's how they're willing to work with it.
I guess it's also hard to justify when you see the riverbed dried up. Then you'd be like, okay, is that even viable now? So, well, thank you for and then Dr. Chen, feel free to weigh in anytime. There are lots of questions queued up. Do you want me to go with the next question?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. Next question is a request to maybe for the panel to explain. Greg mentioned this skyrocketing prices now, maybe nosediving, and then fundamentally has the cost structure of the Trans-Pacific supply chain changed? Or is changing? Is there any insights on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that we've seen a significant vacillation in market conditions relative to container movement, pricing, congestion, network rotations in the last 2 years. So going forward, I think that it's kind of been discussed. I think that everyone's got to be prepared for contingency planning, which I've already mentioned. Number one. Number two, I think we're going to see a change in probably operator base just based on the rapid change in freight rates in the last 3 months. So that's gonna have an impact on capacity, networks, port rotations, and available services as we go forward. There's a regulatory piece that also needs to be probably considered, and that is, you know, will there be regulatory activities, action, or events or initiatives tied to alliances, and that there could be an enormous amount of pressure from the shipping community, you know, either with the FMC, Federal Maritime Commission, or the DOJ to really look at current pricing practices relative to alliances and if there's any connectivity there, to the extent that there may be some changes in how alliances operate going forward. The trade-off with that is certainly you have less service if there's restrictions on operating alliances. So that could be something that is worth watching going forward, and it could have an impact on available services and rotations.
Anyone else want to weigh in on that question? And if not, we have one more question, then we'll close.
I just want to add,
yeah,
sorry,
please.
actually, I've been involved with been doing a paper specifically on that issue that Greg mentioned about the regulatory issues, and we actually organized a series of webinars and invited FMC, European Commission, even the Chinese government officials to weigh on this issue of competition within the container shipping lines. And from the government perspective, as of early this year, they've all kind of agreed that ocean shipping is competitive based on the existing information they have. But the question coming back to them is the regulation adequate? That's the question. Is yes, the answer, they're not breaking any laws, but is the law, you know, really adequate to regulate this industry? Because from a industry perspective, it's a truly global industry, and they connect every single country, whereas the different regulators from different countries don't really coordinate with each other. We found out through the webinars that the European Commission hasn't been talking to FMC. They don't know what they're doing, and they don't know what they're doing. And the Chinese side don't talk to either side either. So how can these governments regulate a global industry when they don't even talk to each other? So one of the things that we hope for going forward is there is some type of more coordination between the different countries, or whether they set up some type of central entity or some kind of body to look at this from a global perspective instead of from each country's national perspective. So that's hopefully is going to happen soon.
That's a wonderful comment. Actually, we're learning more and more that when we work together, solutions are easier to get. Now, one more question before we actually take a break and that turn to a small group discussion, which will not be recorded, only for members and guests. So the question is actually, maybe Helen, you may want to take the head on. It's about this concern about versus decades of globalization, you know, consumers benefiting from the low cost efficiency of global logistics supply chain. We seem to see a retrenchment across the world. People want everything to be local. Do you see that as fundamentally the cost efficient gain of the past decades be losing? So basically, we just need to get ready for some high cost, very complex living situation going forward, given this retrenchment going away from globalization.
Yeah, there does seem to be a retrenchment in a couple of fronts. There are a lot of protectionist measures in the form of tariffs and anti-dumping duties and things of that nature that are on the rise. And there is a trend towards sourcing in country. I know certainly there is in the United States. it's an interesting thing to kind of pull back from the theory of free trade and the 20, 30 years ago, the idea of the reduction of tariffs globally and making things where they should be made and exchanging of materials, and geopolitics seems to get in the way of that that theory. But certainly, I do think we anticipate on the global trade side that these types of activities, these punitive tariffs, these protectionist measures aren't expected to go away anytime soon, which has just led to more of the scenario planning of, okay, well, this is what it's going to be. This is what we're going to have to do with respect to our sources of supply and our supply chain, and real investments are being made in changing the industry. It's no longer, temporary, as we perhaps would have thought when, the tariffs came in 4 or 5 years ago in the United States and in China and around the world. Oh, this may be just a temporary situation. It'll go away. We don't have to make too many structural changes to what we're doing. I think that went by the wayside quite a while ago, and particularly got accelerated with the pandemic. So, it remains to be seen if we shift back in the other direction. But I think it's the genie's out of the bottle, so to speak, on the investment and the planning and the actual changes to supply chains, that I don't see it reverting back to what it was before anytime soon.
Great, thank you. So I would suggest Dr. Chen maybe allow panelists to make one more remarks, then we take a little break, and we'll bring in some friends and let the other folks leave, and then we can regroup. Ed, please.
Yeah, it's great discussion. As I said, it's a huge topic, but our 5 panelists provide great insights, and then we cannot fix all issue overnight, but hopefully the discussion can give the audience some takeaways, to think about, something to do in the future. So maybe each of our panelists can make one conclusion statement. So, and then we will close the session. So I'll go with Helen again, if you don't mind.
Well, I gets me back to our recently coined word, crisis-tunity. We've all described all the issues and the headwinds and the challenges that are there, and at the same time that brings opportunity for change and for managing and for forecasting and getting investments in areas that perhaps traditionally didn't get invested in to avoid the impacts in the future of similar crises. So that's my takeaway word for the day.
Thank you. And then Greg?
I'd go back to contingency planning, and it's a little counterintuitive to what we have practiced in the past, which is, just in time, but contingency planning from a routing, sourcing, and delivery aspect. I would leave everyone with that last comment.
Thank you. And then Chang?
Yeah, I would actually really like to repeat what Kurt said. I think one of the key points there is to take a long-term view. I know there's a lot of things going on, and when you get faced with so many uncertainties, it's hard to know what to do. But I think the key is to take a long-term view and build your business and your supply chains with that in mind.
Thank you, Kurt. Chan already took your words. So.
He did. I'll build on what he said, though. So thanks. I think it's strengthen your partnerships, and it's those relationships with those key partners, and take a long-term view towards diversifying your supply base. I think the last one I would add, and I'm going to piggyback on Helen's, is, make sure supply chain continues to have a leadership seat at your table. We very frequently forget what happened and revert back, and I think we've got to keep it front and center, and that'll help guide us going forward.
Thank you. And then Pandya, are you still there?
Yes, I'm here. Yeah, one word is that confronting the coming small uncertainty, no matter the company is big or small, I think it's better to put their own limited resource on focusing on the major customer and the major logistic suppliers, and also internally try to optimize their own management system, especially for the data management, and to keep survive first, and then looking for some more opportunity for future. Specifically for the small company, I will suggest focusing on more to the domestic market instead of globalization. That's maybe one of the better ways to survive first.
Okay, thank you. And then Ming, I think that will conclude our session. I will turn it back to you.
Great, thank you. So at this point, we have stopped recording.